I think the trip to UCLA this weekend is probably the most tricky because it's the time zone thing and because UCLA is playing good football. And UCLA does stop the run. That's one thing they do really well. They don't run the ball well, but they also don't allow their opponents to run the ball well. They may be the only team in Power 4 football that combined numbers between offense and defense allow total rush yards for the defense and offense put together is less than 200 yards. In fact, I think it's like 180 total. It's startling if you get what I'm saying there. They're only averaging a little over 70 yards per game on the ground, and I think maybe giving up just slightly over 100. And it's sort of the polar opposite of the Wisconsin game. And I didn't predict the blowout this past weekend. But, Mark, one thing I did say, and this doesn't take a genius to do, you just go look through stats and kind of look at how Wisconsin's built. Heading into the Iowa game, Wisconsin had the number 4 rush offense in the conference. Iowa had the number 1 rush offense in the conference. So you're like, okay, 2 teams that love to run the football. Let's move to the next criteria. Pass offense. Wisconsin 11th, Iowa 17th. Okay, so it's going to be a run-heavy game. But then you look at these 2 teams' defenses, Iowa and Wisconsin. Wisconsin had the 14th best rush defense in the conference. Iowa 7th, still good, not as elite, but substantially better than 14th. Wisconsin was exceptional in pass defense, but Iowa doesn't throw the ball anyways, so who cares, right? And Iowa's not as good in pass defense. They're 11th, but Wisconsin doesn't throw the ball, so it doesn't matter. So that's kind of what it came down to. Iowa has a defense that's designed to stop the run. Wisconsin has a defense right now is designed to stop the pass. And boy, Iowa ran all over them. And I thought Iowa's defense looked to snuff. Like they looked like the type of defense that we're accustomed to seeing. And it's really been a matter of a few quarters here or there and then one game. That game against Michigan State, that was just such a, they're missing Castro. They didn't, very odd decision not to play Deshaun Lee, who's now turned into the obvious starter, I think, at that cornerback spot opposite Jamari. Maybe that was disciplinary. I've not heard that, but that seemed to be an odd decision with the struggles from Nestor and TJ Hall. But man, this defense has been excellent in large part, like through 85-90% of the season. It's just been bad timing when they haven't been. And they almost found a way to win that game against Iowa State in spite of the second half of poor defense and poor offense. They played poor football that entire second half against Iowa State and still nearly won. I still think they should have kicked that field goal. Mark, did you see the 70-yard, or I shouldn't say 70-yard, but the 55-yarder from Drew Stevens that hit the literally like I don't know how close, maybe 5 or 6 feet below the top of the upright? And he missed it. It doinked right off the upright. But that thing, I'm telling you, the thing would have sailed for 70 yards. They should have gone for the field goal, but nevertheless.
I, like you, thought Iowa was going to win this game, and I didn't give it any thought. I thought Iowa is no question the better team. 42-10, no. Wisconsin held up for 2 to 3 quarters against USC. They played really well against Penn State the week before, had a 1-point lead in the third quarter. They played, they beat up the lesser teams in the conference. I thought that they would get smacked in the face and we would get to see I do not think Wisconsin's a very good football team. Like, they're in that mesh around number 10 to 15 in the conference somewhere.
We just didn't know yet because they didn't really have any bad losses. They had the USC loss, but, Bama and Penn State, and they competed well against Penn State the week prior.
And when USC's on its game, they're just the most enigmatic group of they can go out and beat, how many teams in the Big Ten could beat LSU and take Penn State to overtime? Like, that's how good they can be, but then they can go out and just blow a game in the last 90 seconds like they have week after week after week after week. So anyway, so I was not a believer in Wisconsin football. They have Luke Fickell has not put together, we're going on 2 seasons now. This is a team that was certainly falling off of a plateau and declining under Paul Chryst, but he was still able to hold it together for 9-4 his second to last season. Then obviously Jim Leonhard had to take over the final season. They finished 7-6, but they have gotten no better and probably worse. They're a very odd offensive team where they still give hints that they want to be this pound it down your throat team, but they like to throw it around. And Braden Locke's not very good, and yeah, it's not a good situation at Wisconsin. So
And
this is
they
this
did
I think
lose
is a better team.
they lost the tailback in season. They lost their quarterback, Miami transfer in season. So there are those things. But yeah, Braden Locke's not very good, and that's unfortunate. I think Tyree Walker?
Yeah.
He's good, but yeah, they've not figured out. Luke Fickle has not figured this out yet, and it's just like Iowa. Now they had an extra year to kind of get ready for this, but new coaching staff, they got to figure out how to adjust without that West, because Saturday's game in most seasons would have been the game to determine who goes to the championship game, but not the case this year.
Yeah, and this UCLA game, if this was old Iowa, if this was old Brian Ferentz offensive Iowa, I would be 98% confident that they were going to go out there and take care of business, but it might be 19-17, might be 12-10, might be, fill in the blank. And it may turn out to be that, because UCLA, we should give them credit, and you did off the bat, that they're a much better team than what I thought that they were a few weeks ago and what everyone else. They were a laughing stock out of the gate in the Big Ten. They go to Rutgers, which is a 3-time zone jump, win by a field goal. Rutgers has shown not to be very good, but still, you go on the road in the Big Ten, you win that game. The previous week, they took Minnesota down to the final 20 seconds of the game at home. Minnesota's proven to be a darn good football team. Beat Illinois, of course, over the weekend and have won 4 straight. And then go to Nebraska. And to underline your point about their rush defense, well, they pulled off 3 interceptions. For one thing, they picked off Dylan Raiola twice and then got an interception on the final play of the game to end it. They held Nebraska to 3 yards per carry in that game. So they're playing pretty good football. Iowa's substantially a better team, reflected by 5.5 points. But again, I think that's a bit of a slight to Iowa to a certain extent. I think it's more about, well, we still look at Iowa as a conservative team that's not going to beat anybody by much, but they continue to defy that stereotype with these bludgeoning scores of Minnesota, which is now a good team, Wisconsin, Northwestern, etc.
Washington, yeah.
Yeah, Washington.
So one thing I will say I was wrong about this past weekend. In spite of all those stats, I had Iowa winning by 1, because I kind of thought that perhaps Wisconsin would be able to. I don't know. I don't know why I had them winning by 1. I kind of thought Wisconsin would be able to. The numbers collectively, when you look at them, they're pretty darn even. Like, Wisconsin has a slightly better total offense, slightly better total defense, which is ironic. But yeah, it's like, I think what I didn't pay attention to enough was the numbers against the strength for Iowa. And so that's what I would say. Not saying it's going to be apples to oranges there, but this weekend, it's the opposite, as I said earlier. So UCLA's strength is going up against Iowa's strength, as opposed to Iowa's strength going up against Wisconsin's weakness. So it would be contrary to what the numbers would show that Iowa would just go out there and do what they did against Wisconsin. I mean, maybe they'll run effectively, but it shouldn't be near to that extent. And it's on the road, and it's the travel thing in an arena, or say a stadium where Kirk Ferentz hasn't won as an assistant coach or as a head coach. Not that that really matters, but there is that. So yeah, I don't know. Their quarterback is pretty good, right, Mark?
Ethan Garbers. He
numbers
just
are
got
decent.
back a couple weeks ago, accounted for 5 touchdowns in the Rutgers game, played a pretty efficient game against Nebraska where they didn't need him because they relied more on defense setting up scoring, and they took a big lead and then held on to it running the football.
And let me just make sure Mike here in the chat says UCLA is quote unquote strength. So he's being, I guess he's being snarky. I just want to give you the stats. They've played a tough schedule, like you said, Mark, and they have given up. I was actually doing them a bit of a disservice. They are 3rd in the Big Ten in rush defense, total rush defense. So they're giving up exactly 100 yards per game on the ground. So that is a strength. That means they're better on the ground than Penn State, than Iowa, than Oregon, than Michigan. So I consider that to be a strength. And that's
They
the one thing Iowa does really well offensively.
they've played LSU, Oregon, Penn State,
Think about that. Yeah. So that's my say. So, like I say,
Minnesota, who runs the ball well.
you're going to, it might be a situation where Iowa is forced to play left handed. And it made sense why Iowa approached the Wisconsin game the way they did. First start for Brennan Sullivan. And one thing I was right about, remember I said last week on this show, I said, hey, Wisconsin, I said it to our guests, Wisconsin's had a bad habit of allowing opposing quarterbacks to get a lot of rushing yards. They've given some guys their season highs. Brennan Sullivan ran for 72 yards. Take away the grounding. They count the grounding as a sack, so that takes away from his rushing numbers, which I think is stupid. 58 rush yards for Brendan Sullivan on 9 attempts, really 8 without the grounding. So that kind of came true. I think this week, without looking at opposing quarterback rushing numbers for UCLA, I'm guessing he's going to have to throw. And Kirk ruled Cade out today. So it's going to be Sullivan and Jackson Stratton. Marco Linez has a broken thumb, so he was not available Saturday either. They're all of a sudden real thin at quarterback. You got a former walk-on and former Colorado State Ram as their backup. Ironically enough, he's from La Jolla, so it's like an hour and a half drive, I think, from the Rose Bowl, which is kind of cool storyline. I hope he doesn't play, but if he did, I guess that'd be kind of a cool story. But yeah, I probably should have had in hindsight, I should have had my score prediction for Iowa and Wisconsin much more lopsided. But then it's like, I'm not going to go the opposite direction with this one because I'm looking back and seeing the fallacy in my thinking. I think this game is going to be closer than people think. Now, it's Iowa by 6.5. I think the way this changes is if Iowa's defense just does what it did to Maryland a few years ago, when Iowa went out there and forced 7 turnovers and scored 50 without an offense. I mean, that's not Iowa doesn't have to have an offense to blow a team out, right? If the defense can get rolling like they do sometimes, even in these types of road games. But I mean, UCLA. I mean, I mentioned rush defense. If you look at let's see, passing yards per game, they're 8th in the conference in passing yards per game, and in total offense, they're 6th. So those aren't bad numbers in this conference.
After this game, I'm a UCLA fan the rest of the year. I'm rooting for UCLA. I don't know why. I just thought that they got completely trashed by everyone as a joke early on, and they've bounced back nicely. And go back to Big Ten Media Days. We noticed it. Everybody noticed it. We, from what I remember, yes, we had a little bit of fun with it, but then we quickly came into line that, that Deshaun Foster's presentation at the Big Ten Media Days was a bit odd, but we didn't make fun of him. We just said it was just kind of strange that he wasn't prepared.
Very strange.
And it was just kind of odd because he just got up there and it was like if you just selected somebody from the crowd and said, come up here and start talking, and they weren't prepared. It was like, no, you traveled all the way from Los Angeles for this. You could have maybe jotted some notes down in the plane or something. But anyway, it was just like, so that blown out of proportion by many people, or gave the air of, okay, maybe he's not ready for this job. Obviously, he's never been a head coach before, was not even a coordinator, was a position coach. But he seems to have found something and is coaching this team rather well, and they're playing good football. And so I'm interested in this game for some other reasons. Is that I am fascinated with, as I've mentioned the entire offseason, anytime these 4 from the West Coast are playing the old guard of the Big Ten, just to see how they match up and see how these games play out. Aside from USC not being anywhere close to as good as most people thought they were going to be, Oregon might be the best team in the conference. UCLA, despite us lauding their recent improvement, they're still near the bottom of the conference. I believe I've got them 12th in my recently released Big Ten power rankings. I've got them at 12. And Washington's, I've got them 10 or 11, something like that. So yeah, for those of us that harken back to days gone by and Rose Bowl matchups, Iowa and UCLA following the 1985 season, and Iowa was a pretty substantial favorite with Chuck Long, who, of course, lost the closest Heisman vote in the history of the game to Bo Jackson. They were trounced pretty heavily by UCLA. 45-28, I believe, was the final score. So
And
to see those uniforms on the same field at the Rose Bowl, it's going to bring back memories for me.
Let me just add one more key element about these stats. Not only is UCLA's strength on defense stopping the run, but their strength on offense is throwing the ball, which will be going up against Iowa's weakness on defense. So it's literally the opposite. I'm not saying it's to the extent, but it's the opposite of last week.
Do you think that Iowa is truly weak defending the pass, or that is just a statistic based on teams getting behind and having to throw the ball?
They're 11th.
What did Braden Locke throw for last week? Let's see here.
Iowa looked as good as they have all year last week defensively. I think all around. I mean, they didn't give up much to Braden Locke. They forced a couple of turnovers. Deshaun Lee finally played well. They finally got production out of that cornerback spot, and I think the safeties are playing better than they have. But I mean, Iowa's 11th in the conference right now in past, or prior to last week. I haven't looked at the updated stats. I guess I could do that. 11th in the conference in pass defense. So no, I don't think they're bad. I'm just saying they haven't gone up against murderers row besides like Ohio State and Iowa State as it relates to pass offense. And those numbers are the lower half of the conference. So
I guarantee that they're much better in terms of pass efficiency defense.
Sure. And how does that measured?
That's basically a quarterback rating. I'll look that up here in a second.
Iowa's, by the way, since the Wisconsin win, Iowa has now moved up in total pass defense. Iowa's moved up from 11th to 10th. So slightly better. I'll make an adjustment for this week's stats.
Where are you pulling these numbers from?
I'm pulling these numbers from big10.org/football/stats.
So here is pass efficiency defense. Now, this is nationally. We would have to count all the Big Ten teams. So here we go. And we're looking at last week's stats against Wisconsin. And here we go with the national. And that, again, is the rating there, where Texas has the best pass defense in the country. And Iowa, hopefully I don't miss them here, they are number 49 in efficiency in the nation. Wisconsin's a couple notches above them.
But that's not very good, Mark. I mean, not for an Iowa defense.
Ohio State's 27. Two Big Ten teams. Indiana, Penn State, that's 4.
Minnesota
5.
So yeah, slightly. 6. Yeah, they're better. They're better in pass efficiency defense. So, and I think maybe they're better now in general. Like the stats aren't as telling for where they are now. If that's any indication from what we saw from Deshaun Lee Saturday, it's not just a continuation of the same.
Who passed well against them? I guess Iowa State and
Iowa State didn't until the second half, but Michigan State. Aiden Childs passed well against Iowa. That's the one that stands out in my mind. And then Will Rogers passed well for a time.
Yeah,
got a lot of yards. Like that's where the yardage thing comes in. And Iowa does bend and not break, but like I say, that those numbers aren't as good as in past seasons, regardless of the structure of Iowa's defense. But yeah, Michigan State for sure. They bent more against Michigan State, and then, like I say, they've been against Washington pretty drastically, and Ohio State.
So here we go. They've given up 63% completion percentage. They've given up 14 touchdowns, and they have 12 interceptions.
But the 63, see how that's higher than all the like teams?
Yeah, and I'm going to 2023 when they were 4th in pass efficiency defense.
That's interesting, yeah.
They gave up 11 touchdowns, 10 picks, and gave up 56%.
But see how I'll stand by what I said, though. See the pass completion percentage defensively. That number is always going to be lower than teams around them. See, like the teams in their tier are all 48, 52, 55, 52, 52. Because Iowa's just going to keep everything in front of them. So I do think that affects things. Now, you'd have to educate me a little bit as it relates to how exactly passing efficiency, passer rating is measured. Because part of that is completion percentage. I'm assuming it's a conglomerate of all those stats that we see up there. It's a combination of yards per attempt, touchdown to interception, all that stuff.
It's basically your touchdown to interception ratio, or more accurately, your touchdown percentage and your interception percentage versus the number of attempts. To make it easy, per 100 attempts, if your quarterback throws 15 touchdowns and my quarterback throws 10 touchdowns, obviously your quarterback's better in that category. And in 100 pass attempts, your quarterback threw 8 interceptions and mine threw 6. Well, then obviously that's another factor. The completion percentage, and then the other factor is the yards per, whether you measure it per attempt or per completion, the number of yards percentage gained per pass play. So, you can't throw 3-yard completions all day and be 13 for 13 for 49 yards and have a high passer rating.
So yeah, Iowa gave up 256 yards passing against Michigan State. Felt like more. And then against Washington, a game they won 40-16, they gave up 266. So I think, those two games are the ones that stand out. Ohio State, they gave up.
They didn't throw for much.
209.
But I bet they were efficient.
I bet they were too.
What were the attempts and completions? Do you have that?
I do, but I was going to say Troy threw for 229 against Iowa, and Iowa State threw for, 272.
After basically nothing in the first half.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me go back to Ohio State. Yeah. So Mr. Howard was 21 of 25. 21 of 25.
What's that, like 20 of 25 is 80%. So it's like 83%.
209 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 pick.
Oh, well, yeah, that 4 touchdowns in only 25 attempts.
So I don't know. I don't know. You know what this fan base needed, Mark? They needed a quarterback change, and they got it. They got the quarterback change. So now fans can be excited and enjoy this. Iowa still has the lowest the lowest total of all conference games this week.
41?
44.5.
Okay.
So I think that's partly credit to UCLA's defense.
Yeah, it's both. It's a combination.
Yeah.
They have to be moving that line somewhat with Iowa scoring as many points as they are now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, no, I'll be fascinated by all this. And, what's this offense going to look like next year? I mean, we've seen enough from Brennan Sullivan. I think he ought to be the starter regardless of Cade's health. It sounds like Cade's not good to go this weekend. And even if he does clear concussion protocol, he's not going to be good to go. So, yeah, I mean, you need Cade as a depth piece, but there's no point in returning to him at this point. There's just not, unless something happens to Brennan Sullivan. There's just no point. Now, if Brennan Sullivan goes down with an injury, what do you do, Mark?
What do you do?
Yeah, what do you do? Who do you play?
Well, you played McNamara if he's healthy.
Yeah, you play Cade. Yeah, I just wanted somebody else to say it.
Yeah.
You play Cade. Like, that's still a luxury to have Cade McNamara as a backup. So, you want him to get healthy. I think fans are worried that somehow he gets healthy and all of a sudden he's the starter again. But it wouldn't be good if Sullivan goes down this weekend and Jackson Stratton's in there. I think he could get the job done because it's going to be a heavy dose of the run. But if he's forced to throw, there's question marks there. Although Kirk did compliment his arm. The kid's got a big arm. He was originally committed to Washington. He's not the most mobile. He's a pocket guy. But, man, he's got a big arm. And I don't know if you remember, I did a video on him like back in the summer. And it was titled the Iowa QB that no one is talking about. It got like 30,000 hits, Mark.
Wow. That's all you have to put on every video that no one is talking
There
about,
is literally,
or
well, you I think you and I are I think you and I are thinking of the same
or
thing.
yes, or this will shock you.
Yeah, this will shock you. And then if you really want to get creative, you can have somebody's face just look like they're in shock when you have that in your title.